Felix and Tony. Camacho Adam. Felix and Tony. Camacho Adam. They're the right reason for a new season. Together we rise.
Welcome back to another episode of On the Trail with Felix and Tony. This is episode number 11. I'm Felix Camacho. I'm running for governor in the upcoming 2022 general election. And joining me every week and every moment on the trail on this campaign is my running mate, Senator Tony Adelup. Good morning, Senator.
Off day.
So today will be a little different. We want to dedicate this episode to questions that we've received through our social media platforms. We've received so many questions that this kind of episode is absolutely needed.
Yes.
And so let's go through this week on the trail, and then we'll jump right into the questions. So
sounds great. You know, we had a very busy week. Started out with Sunday. We had that wonderful pocket meeting down in Hoggett with our new form merger of the Camacho Ada and the San Nicolas Salas Mantanani village organizations, and it was a wonderful turnout. I think on the onset we were told just some few people just coming together to just to meet with you. When we got there, were you surprised as I was that how many cars and how many people were there?
Well, when they say small in our southern villages, and in this case it was agate, I think small is no less than 100.
Yeah, I'm beginning to figure that out now. Yeah. So we started out the week with that pocket meeting, and then we had the American Legion this past week. Also, we had a little get together up there, a little social gathering, and met a lot of new people. The veterans that are members of the American Legion, and them welcoming us there. That was an awesome night. In our
came to find out they have a pretty good breakfast menu and lunch menu and Saturday menu with steaks and the like. So,
yeah. Well, what was that menu?
Check it out.
Like $6, right, for
pork
chop, or
$6 with pork chops, potatoes, and eggs.
Yeah,
that's not so bad.
No, not so bad. So when are you going to treat me?
Oh, anytime. All right. And don't forget, we also had a very successful fundraiser at the Dusit, and wonderful attendance. In fact, it was interesting because, typically after the speeches given by the candidates, people would up and leave, but I don't think we got out of there before 11 p.m. Nobody wanted to leave.
Yeah. That was really nice. And I think what it came down to was everybody just enjoying the company of one another. Yeah. They're able to be there with one another. And I think also they were comparing notes, the struggles and challenges that the businesses had, and solutions for it, and what they want to do and how they want to move forward. And them being there at our fundraiser told us that they want change and they want to continue to move forward with that. And, that turned out wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this morning, I know that you were up since 3 a.m. getting ready for an event that this morning that was sponsored by Marie Halloran and her husband and their organization.
Yeah, it was the 18th annual Life Works. It's about suicide, talking about suicide and survivors, and I've been a part of that for many years now, and a lot of people that don't know that I also suffered a tragic loss of suicide in my family, and it happened 44 years ago, and how it is right back then. We don't talk about these things. And even amongst my siblings or when my parents were still around, that's something that we don't talk about. And it wasn't just until last year that I came out and I spoke about my brother's death through suicide. So it's something that all those that attended felt some type of connection to one another because of the loss that they suffered, and what are we doing to move forward? A very good question came up also, and she was mentioning about what are we doing for survivors, and what are we doing for those, what is the government agencies doing? Because she went to different places and she couldn't find assistance, and so I think that's a subject that we also need to look into. And how is it that we can give those services to our families locally that suffer a loss through suicide, and those that survive suicide, the help that they need as well, to move on with life and to do what they can to help and assist others. It was it was a very, very touching and heartfelt event this morning. We had a little candlelight ceremony, and then we had a little walk in memory of all those that we lost. And tonight we have our 30th anniversary for the Lions Club International District 204. That Annette and I will be going to. And I understand that you're going to be going where?
Well, Joanne and I, we have to split duties, right, tonight.
Yeah.
So Joanne and I will be attending the Chamber of Commerce. I believe they have a gala event.
Yeah.
So
we got two busy events going on tonight. And tomorrow
Well, I do want to share, though, that last night was a very special event for us. We began by celebrating my mom's 94th birthday.
Happy birthday, Auntie Lou.
Auntie Lou, also known as Auntie Duri, and started off with Mass at 11 a.m. at St. Anthony's. It was supposed to be a time of rest for her at home until the evening celebration, but I understand she had so many visitors coming by the house to say and wish her well and pray with her that she got a little bit tired and was late to the celebration birthday party we had at Mezcla. It was a private event with just our family, because when you add my siblings and our spouses and children and grandchildren, and for my mom, great-grandchildren, it was quite a crowd. But what a blessing that she's been able to live that long. And so we also had a brother of mine, Rick, and his wife, Jenny, fly in from Virginia, and they were able to join us from the airport right to the celebration. So, yeah, it's so interesting in how we had that celebration of life, and then you had, attended an event that dealt with the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And both events very heartfelt, but that's part of life. Yeah.
The circle of life. We're going to get right into the questions.
Okay.
I believe that we had a couple of questions that came in from the Guam Federation of Teachers, and we can go ahead and have Ty read them out, and we'll try and knock them out as soon as much as we can.
It's a lot of Q&As today, so we still have our social media side, but we have about 5 questions here, so we'll start with the first one. Employees and the residents of Guam deal with dilapidated buildings such as schools, GMH, restrooms at parks, non-functional pools and prison, and old equipment such as port cranes, police officer safety equipment, and fire equipment that cause unsafe working conditions. What have you done under your tenure to address the deficiencies? What are your plans to resolve and fund the ongoing issues of maintaining and building, if necessary, new facilities?
Gov, I believe that under your first stint as governor, that you addressed a lot of issues during your term, not just in maintaining, but also building new facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very difficult time then when I stepped into office. Of course, we were struggling from the aftermath of 2 successive storms, one in July, which was Chataan, and then in December 8th, which is Pongsanwa. So our schools were damaged. The hospital was damaged. We had even tents in the parking lot of GMH. The mayors got involved. Many of the homes that were, I guess, not of concrete construction, may have had tin roofs, and others may be considered substandard, were destroyed. And the homeless situation was greatly exacerbated at that point in time. And then, of course, we had challenges with the Attorney General and our desire to go out and finance and build. Certainly we had help from FEMA, but we had to begin to think outside the box. And it was at that point in time that we began to, first of all, repair existing classrooms. I think we built about 111 classrooms in the various schools around the island, inclusive of DYA, to get the schools up and running. And then we were able to talk to Department of Interior and say, look, we've got compact impact money. And my argument was, you've allowed the governor's discretion to use that money at their discretion with their pet projects. I'd like to put that into brick and mortar. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, we've had if this is to use to offset the impact of migration from the freely associated states into Guam and other countries that come into Guam. Look at the demographics of what's happening with migration and the number of children at the elementary, at the middle school and high school coming into our island. We need to build schools. And so with that, they approved the use of it. Now that we had an approved source of funding, we went and worked. I believe I worked with the legislature, particularly Senator Larry Kasperbauer, and began to take a look at what is the master plan for Department of Education. And remember, that time it was very difficult because you had a newly elected Board of Education. You had a newly appointed superintendent by the board. And so they had their own mindset of how they were going to run things. But in cooperation with them and established where are the necessary schools that have to be built based on demographics and based on need and based on the condition, we were able to then identify certain sites with Chamorro Land Trust properties, get that cleared out. We even had to move certain people that were basically squatting,
Right.
using it, whether it was their own arendu or pig farm or whatever the case may be. Adelup comes to mind. That was a very difficult, contentious situation where the person or the group that was there did not want to leave, and we really had to work with them. But we finally got their cooperation as they understood it's for the children. But using that municipal lease program, they then would come in and design, build, maintain the schools, and then the government would take over after 20 years using the funding source we had. And so we were able to build, we did Ukadu High School. We built New Liguan Elementary School. We built Adelup, and I believe we built Machinano. And then the legislature got involved, of course, and they wanted to build JFK, so we began the process, but that had to deal with a different financing source by going into the bond market, and I think it cost $100 million at that time. And so it kind of complicated things when the legislature got involved, but we still went with it, and Governor Eddie Calvo was able to cut the ribbon. We also went up to Tizen, and working out with Cortec there, we agreed to lease the property and develop that as a transition school. We moved the JFK students that were displaced, moved them out of GW back into the Tijen location. And then when JFK was built, they transitioned out. We also did that, I believe, for Untitled Middle School. So those are our ideas that we had in how to fund and build. But I was also able to build together with Kaleo Monin and Dr. Mike Cruz as Lieutenant Governors, fire stations, senior citizen centers, student resource centers, boat ramps, public parks, and other recreational facilities to include the Dededo Sports Complex. And that group under the Guam Football Association, working with FIFA and the government providing the land, and it worked out tremendous. Look at what we have there. We built also the baseball fields that are there. We built the pool for the children, and we built the skate park also across the street, and we also built a walking path. And so when elected into office, I think, Tony, you and I are committed to build and expand our island schools. There has to be an assessment throughout of all the structures to determine what needs to be done. And also take a look at Gov Guam. Look at the best number or options to finance and construct and modernize our schools and other government facilities. And again, using public-private partnerships as a vehicle. And so we are going to prioritize school facility, the master plan with Department of Education or GDOE. and look at a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, so short-term, mid-term, long-term strategic plans and other facilities within GovGuam and their agencies.
And I think that's how it works out perfectly, is this public-private partnership where we get the private sector involved in helping us to formulate and also move forward with these type of projects.
Right.
And I know that you did those schools almost 20 years ago or 20 years ago.
Right.
And those will be reverting back to government of Guam. So I think, they need to be proactive at this point in time on the maintenance now of those schools that are reverting back to GovGuam.
Maintenance and upkeep.
Exactly. Absolutely. So that's another issue that needs to be dealt with. Mm-hmm. And when we looked in the media this past week about closures of school, Oceanville Middle School, FBLG, all the issues that are now coming up about our school, I think perhaps if you agree with me, that the Department of Education needs to look at getting a CMT team, a construction management team, involved in this process way before they put any bids out, so that they can actually go through and assess the schools and assess what's going on, so that they can look out for the best interest of the government and Department of Education, and saying, hey, wait a minute, what did you say that was going to cost? No, that's not, And I think that's the importance of getting a CMT team involved early on, and hopefully that's what they look at when we.
Yeah, it's always wise that you can't make plans and begin the process of building unless you calculate the cost. I mean, you can lay the foundation, but if you don't have the funds to bring it to completion, there'll be a lot. It'll be a mockery, and so we have to be very smart and diligent about it. Also recognizing that there are other federal funds out there. There's housing and urban development. There's community development block grants. Right. And there's FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency funds that can help, I guess, strengthen our facilities in the event of typhoons and other natural disasters that come our way.
And I think it's also with equipment and vehicles and equipment to where we start looking at having them have a maintenance contract with them. So if we purchase vehicles, it has to come with a maintenance contract. Or if we lease vehicles, it comes with a maintenance contract. Equipment that we purchase should come with a warranty, for a couple of three-year warranty or something like that, so that we don't have to worry about these issues on short term, and they're out for long-term care, and that way every 3 to 5 years perhaps replaced or repaired. Yeah.
Thank you,
Gov.
Next question.
The government of Guam spends millions each year on renting facilities around the island. Addressing this issue has the potential to create a revenue stream to address the government facilities in disrepair. What are your plans in your capacity as governor once elected to reduce the rental costs of the government?
Yeah, again, you can recall the old Department of Administration building that was torn down. Of course, it had been there for well over 50 years. And then many of the agencies that moved into other private facilities. The Guam legislature is an example of how it did take a while, but they eventually went back and took that historic building of the Guam legislature, expanded it to establish the operations of the legislature, right, as you know. But where they were, even in my time as a senator, we were always in that building near Holale. And when I thought about it, it was like the landlord was very fortunate there in that the Guam legislature basically paid for that mortgage for the life of it.
10 times over.
Yeah, many times over. It was extremely lucrative. Yeah. And certainly, this government, having the government of Guam as a tenant in any publicly or privately owned facility is a good revenue source for the landlord. But we do need to take a look at facilities within the government that makes logical sense as to where they ought to be placed, and finding the finances, or of course the monies to build and place them in there. I know that you're well aware, Senator, of certain
Yeah, I believe
agencies.
a couple of years ago, Senator Duenas introduced legislation that would have the Department of Land Management. There's a piece of government land right there by Hulalis again, and that is government owned, and to build a land management building. And I guess the concept of it was to have land management on the top, and then you'll be able to have, stores on the bottom, or, commercial retail down there. So
Wasn't that also inclusive of perhaps merging also ancestral lands into
and
that same
Chamorro land.
facility?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we all have the three agencies into one building, and it's still I'm not sure where that's at right now, but hopefully it'd be able to move forward soon, so that and maybe we can inch that forward again, and actually make it come to fruition, so that we can get them out of leasing and get them into their own facility. And it comes to a perfect example again. Headquarters for the Guam Police Department. We still don't have one. I believe that a piece of property was identified, and as to why they're not moving forward in building a headquarters for the police department, these past 4 years, I'm not sure why they haven't even discussed building it. And I think that our men and women in blue are just like, they keep moving us from there to there, and we're in Tizen. It's still a temporary home. They need a home of their own, and I'm sure under our administration that we're going to move forward and, get that home for them. So that
I believe in my time with GPD, it was actually up at the old Naval Air Station, NAS, and the lands reverted back to Gov Guam. And GPD had moved into one of those buildings there that was actually old, next to the old swimming pool area.
Right.
A 2-story complex, and eventually, and so we had to renovate that, and they operated out of that, but they were very dire situations. Reverend Tax was also in another complex, and I recall with the storm that came and the water damage, the buildup of mold and everything else, we had to move them out there for their own safety, and eventually rented the property up there by Lower Barragata Heights,
Right.
where they're currently at. But so there have been opportunities in the past where we saw a need to move out of an old government building and put them in a better environment in the short term and midterm. But long term, we do need to do an assessment of crunch the numbers and look at what is the best alternative. The current situation with the shortage of labor in construction, the rising cost of materials, building materials, are many of the challenges that we face. And in talking to some contractors, they say we can bid on a certain project at this time, but as delays occur in government permitting and all the other requirements, once they break ground, keeping within that budget, even factoring in their profit margins, are quickly eaten up. So very interesting times ahead if we're going to move in this direction.
Yeah, and I think that we also need to look at getting the process streamlined and cutting a lot of this red tape in the permitting process. Example, McDonald's, I think, had to wait almost a year just to get a permit to renovate. And, there's others out there. And if we're inviting people in to invest into our island and to build and put hundreds of millions of dollars here, only to meet with delays and bureaucratic red tape, then, they may just move somewhere else. And that's a process that we need to really look at.
So let's look at the public health facility up in Manila that suffered a fire. And I believe the source of it was electrical shortages that caused it to. It's an old building, historic in some sense, but what can we do? An assessment must be done to see if we can repair that. We take a look at the northern and the southern community health centers. We need to improve these. I know that there's a lot of concern about that situation up there, and of course it leads into the hospital. But there are assessments that needs to be done, and again determining what is the best approach in repairing these facilities. A
while back I introduced a piece of legislation that would provide for a study to see what our northern and southern healthcare centers can actually be like an urgent care center. So those that need emergency assistance or medical assistance at the late night hours, that they didn't have to drive all the way up to GMH, that they'd be able to go right there at the Southern Health Clinic or the Northern Health Clinic. But that wasn't able to pass. So it's okay. We continue to drive on, and we do what we can to improve our healthcare facilities, and what we can to make things better for our island.
Thank you.
The wages of government and private sector employees have historically lagged behind their national counterparts. This creates an environment where people leave Guam to pursue a better life elsewhere. Most private sector employees rely on Social Security for their retirement, and the new Government of Guam retirement plan is a paltry 401k equivalent with up to 5% matching. What have you done, and what will you do in your role as governor to offer a competitive salary for government employees and to foster an environment where private businesses will prioritize an increase in wages and salaries? What plan do you have to ensure that public and private employees can retire with a decent safety net?
It's interesting. There was an article I read in the Washington Post, and it talked about the brain drain and the trend of reducing populations in the U.S. territories. And it stated that starting in the 1960s. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so it talked about that starting in the 1960s and even earlier. U.S. and territorial officers used aggressive tax incentives to lure factories and other types of industries. It worked where global industries reshaped the islands. It talked about Puerto Rico, where there were textile, pharmaceutical factories in Puerto Rico. And in the Northern Marianas, I think we're all aware of the textile factories that were there. In Virgin Islands, it was oil refineries. Even Guam, we had Guam Oil Refinery Company, GORCO, as it was called. And in American Samoa, you had the tuna packing industry. But then, of course, the politicians got involved in Washington, and they began to crack down on what they called corporate welfare during the Clinton administration. And the years that followed, most of those tax breaks disappeared, and the most prominent of them expired just as it says the Chinese factories were hitting their stride. And so what happened is the islands and the manufacturers and these industries depended on these tax breaks, and they couldn't weather the storm of the competition coming out of China. And so what happened is, from 1996 to 2006, it explains where there was a massive decline in these industries in Puerto Rico, in the Northern Marianas. Guam even had a watch manufacturer that was here, and we had a small bit of textile that left because of the elimination of Section 936, as they call it. So these economic struggles have exacerbated and accelerated the brain drain on the islands as the young and ambitious leave to attend school or join the U.S. military. And similar to the States where rural kids would be seeking their fortunes in cities, the islanders often put down roots in the mainland where their college degrees or experiences, even coming out of military, retiring there, and they're raising their families, they find it more remunerative, and the islands just don't have many high-paying opportunities, is what the article says, for the educated. And so it says it's really troubling for our middle-class students and graduates here. That was Roseanne Jones talking about that. So it's very challenging. They say the families are leaving because they find it challenging very challenging place on the islands to economically build and raise a family and to commit to. And so the exodus of our best and brightest continues to make the islands less attractive for even others, industries thinking about coming into Guam. It's been a downward spiral, but I think one thing unique to the islands like Guam is because of the FAS compact agreements with the United States. Although we've had many of our students leaving either joining the military or for school. The population has not necessarily decreased on Guam because we have immigration from the freely associated
Right.
states into our island. But we do have, there are many thousands of higher paying jobs and skilled labor jobs on Guam that are currently being filled by off-island workers from the U.S. and the Philippines and other countries. So we just have to get our people trained to take some of these higher paying skilled labor jobs. And of course, more can be done to help our local residents acquire these skill sets for these jobs.
Right.
Senator?
And even with Guam, I believe it was perhaps back in your time, God, that with the Hay Pay, right? The Hay study that you've you worked with the Hay study. And when we start talking now about government pay, and when we look at what happened just several weeks ago on the teacher pay raises, right? Where now the administration, what this administration has done is actually piecemeal, started taking different sectors of, okay, we'll give teachers pay raise. Okay, we'll give law enforcement. Okay, we'll give, but I believe the concept of the Hay Pay Plan was to do a complete government-wide, across the board pay study and implementation. Am I correct on that?
Yes. If I may, again, if you don't learn the lessons from history, you're likely to repeat them again. And I see we've come full circle. What we did back then, under the direction of Governor Joseph Ada, I was the executive director at Civil Service Commission then, and we had just come off a lawsuit and a settlement, and it was called 5440. And what they did was they gave a pay raise based on the rate of inflation from one point to the other, and came up with that figure and gave it across the board. And what it did was it took the lower paying jobs and raised them up by a large percentage, and there was very little movement at the top end, so it really compressed the pay grades. The system was always also based upon what was called a comparative pay scale. So, for example, they would take a nurse and say a nurse is similar in the level of skill and education requirements, and with a teacher, and so they would always have to basically equate these two. It resulted from what happened was that you had a school health counselor, which is basically a nurse qualification or qualified position, that said, well, if you gave the teachers a raise, then I, as a nurse, I'm also going to sue the government of Guam for inequity in pay. And that's what started everything. So we went with what's called the Hay study, and it changed the entire methodology of taking each position based on your duties and responsibilities. And we had to conduct desk audits throughout the government of Guam for every single position. Not only that, we had to eliminate positions that were no longer viable, like they had keyhole punchers and the like, that we just had to clean up all the position descriptions in government and classification. And based on that, it was a unified pay scale. In fact, Senator, we were able to get even all three branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial branches together, saying, secretaries at this level, this is the pay. Because if you worked for an autonomous agency, more than likely you were getting paid higher than a secretary within the line agencies. If you worked at the court, you probably, depending on the position, also got paid more so than other positions in the government. For example, the Attorney General's office. And so we came up with a unified pay plan that was based on a weighted system. And then, of course, it began to fall apart when the Guam legislature got involved again by giving pay raises. And the first instance was the court marshals. And so the argument was that they had to equate the court marshals with the Guam Police Department officers, GPD officers. And that began to, once you had a crack in the unified plan, it it cracked further, and time again, you would see now
Now
the
it's
legislature or the governor coming in currently with executive orders.
crumbling. Right.
And now you've got everyone scrambling and arguing for equity in pay because they're using a comparison or comparative type basis versus the weighted system on the duties and responsibilities of the job and what they ought to pay. And then you couple that with what can the government pay with an economy of our size and the tax base that we have. It was determined by a study that this government of Guam gives away more in the way of tax breaks than most other jurisdictions. And so how do we then provide for adequate compensation with the current tax base and revenue base that we have? So there's a lot of factors involved.
Yeah,
But
that's something that we're going to have to re-examine
Yeah.
again, and when we get in there and look at it and take it from ground zero once again.
Right.
And,
and we need to, because if we're going to effectively compete against a global market for the talent and skill sets that we need on Guam, that must be
yeah.
part of the solution.
Okay. Thank you, Gov, for that.
Thank you.
The housing prices skyrocketed, and it remains beyond reach for individuals starting a family. In addition, homelessness appears to be on the rise. How will you address the lack of housing inventory and homelessness?
Well, one thing we did in my time was we took advantage of a federal program. It was called the LIHTC, or Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And these credits were assigned to each of the insular territories. No one had taken advantage of it. And so, again, working with the legislature and working with private sector, we were able to have these investors come in and provide the funding where they would then build. And the idea was, how do we get individuals out of rental units and make them become homeowners? And so building a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom type house. And in these days now they even have townhouses where they would come in at a fixed rate of $750, $850 a month over 15 years. The incentive was, if you take care of this unit, if you stay and maintain here for 15 years, once the tax credit period has lapsed, you have an opportunity then to become a homeowner buying it at the market rate or price 15 years ago.
Wow.
Because the investor then made all their money and their profit. And so it took renters and now are turning them into homeowners. And with that also, it was able to provide for senior citizen housing and lower income housing too. And so that was one of the first approaches we took. There are many challenges, of course, nowadays, because what's happened is, although we've to some extent addressed the low income, the middle income sector is where they're really hurting, because their income level, if you have mom and dad both working, or one of them may have a 2-job salary combined, they don't qualify because they exceed the threshold. Yet they don't qualify for the loans that they need to build or to purchase, because they don't make enough money. And so you've got that one gap that we do need to take care of and address and find ways to deal with that. And then, of course, we have the those that are now homeless. We have noticed, living in Tamuning, there are, of course, many intersections. And in talking with the mayor, she says, yes, we have identified new individuals that are being flown in with a one-way ticket to Guam. And they're coming into my office, the office of the mayor, to establish a mailing address, using the mayor's office as the address, so that they can then receive mail and establish some form of residency, or whatever the case may be. And so that's how we've been able to notice that you have individuals now coming in from other jurisdictions outside of Guam. It could be Hawaii, it could be the West Coast, coming to Guam. The weather's good. You can practically go to any church or any other place, and you find a place. People are generous here. They would give you food. There are many others out there. And so we've got them. We've got the individuals that are dealing with drugs. You have individuals that are drug addicted and are suffering from that. We have individuals that have criminal records and others that are just out there because they've been rejected by their families. And so it is a very big socioeconomic issue that we need to tackle.
Yeah.
And
I think when you look at what we have today, we have housing, affordable housing. But now we need to look at what we can do to make housing affordable, right? Home ownership affordable. Yeah. And I think that's where, working with, Department of Labor, because when we look at what construction costs now is, it's really gone up. And even with rental, and I think a part of that is the what they get from military renters, because they have their overseas housing allowance that allows them to, rent at a higher bracket than what locals can rent. And, you can't blame the homeowner or the, about renting to military, but I think we need to find that medium there where we can say, how is it that we can continue to accommodate the military renters, but at the same token, ensure our people are not left out.
Yeah, and so again, we are going to have to prioritize housing. We are going to have to look at some of the federal policies out there and push to engage the U.S. Department of Agriculture to seek designation of Guam as a substantially underserved trust territory. They call it SUTA, to provide much needed tools to the island residents to help finance improvements in their electric, telecommunications, water, and sewer infrastructure for Guam, government of Guam. We also are looking at ways to allow for private sector investment into local affordable housing projects. And one thing we certainly want to do is take our Chamorro Land Trust properties and others and get them properly surveyed. There's a long waiting list of several thousands out there. Get those lands properly surveyed and marked and distributed. And then we've got to find ways of dealing with the infrastructure
water
that has to go in.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sadly, you've seen projects, for example, at Zero Down, Gil Baza, Gil Breeze. 3 subdivisions that were privately owned, and it was some kind of a scheme to get the people to buy the land, but the infrastructure was never put in place. Little by little, it's getting up there, but we do need to focus in on these existing areas where many of our people are living, and address not only that which exists, but look at what's happening again with Chamorro Land Trust landowners.
Yeah. And no one should live without the basic necessities.
Correct.
Water and power.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is the last question from the GFT. People with Chamorro lineage and other residents of Guam have not voted for the island's political status in many years. Other than action by Congress to adopt the Organic Act, our political status with the United States has not changed since Spain ceded Guam in 1898. With 2022 coming to an end, what actionable timelines do you have in mind to resolve the years of inaction?
Well, I know that the government of Guam has a commission on decolonization. It was established by law, public law. And there have been attempts, I think back in the 70s, I remember I was probably in high school then or in college, that they had a constitutional convention, right? We've had that in the past. So there have been certain attempts at political status. And perhaps it is a time now that a political status vote will come in full cooperation with the Guam Election Commission to see if that can be funded and see if there's an approach there, and work with them to consider this important choice for Guam residents as we work towards a status vote during our time in office. So we do need to, Senator.
Yeah, I remember when Governor Calvo tried to do a plebiscite vote, right? To move forward with it, and just the roadblocks and the obstacles. Even when I went back to New York to the United Nations, and I was with then Speaker Judy Wampat, and we were visiting the different island nations' offices that were there in New York, and they said, you know what? It's a difficult time for you guys to try and move your political status forward because the United States, has that power over not just you guys, but also the outer islands, right? Where they say, well, when it comes to a vote, they start lobbying the FSM and those others, to stay with the U.S.'s vote on how they move forward. And they said, what you need to do is you need to work with the Office of Insular Affairs and, go with that route and see what you guys can get out of there. Because 4 years ago, I even told I think it was the great debate or one of the debates that we had that all we're doing is we just keep running in circles. And eventually we need to get out of that circle and come forward and do something with this, the status and, get it. If we're going to stay in the current status that we're in, or if, whatever one of the other statuses that are out there, because they have the independent statehood and free association, right?
And status quo.
Yeah, and status quo. So, hopefully something will come out of it. And timelines, we've been in this for the past 30, 40 years, and I don't think it's going to get resolved in the next 4, 8, or even 10 years. We can work at it and we can chip at it, but to actually come to a resolution to it, it's going to be perhaps not in my lifetime. So,
and I think we all recognize, of course, that our status is granted to us by Congress, and and the whole argument of Guam or the United States is it really truly a democracy, or have we forgotten the fact that we are a republic? So you can live on Guam, but once you get on a plane and land in California, or even the state of Hawaii, you step off the plane, that all changes. You now have the right to vote. You're fully incorporated, and once you establish residency, even more so. And so there are certain realities that we have to face. And I often think about, like my brother who just returned, after having lived in the U.S. for maybe 20, 25 years now with his family, raising them there in the state of Virginia, here to visit my mom for her birthday. But, I look at their children and the opportunities that they have for education and careers, and many that have left Guam in the military to eventually settle. And once they get out of the military, they raise their families. So what does it take for Guam to be fully incorporated into becoming a full-fledged American citizen, but also recognize the advantages that we have, the federal taxes that come, the fact that we don't pay federal taxes, and as a territory, the amount of monies we receive, the Section 30 monies that the states don't receive, the Compact Impact funding. And so I believe that we must always advocate to be more fully incorporated, and of course recognize our advantages of being part of what is still considered the greatest nation in the world, and the opportunities it takes for us, even as families are leaving because they can't make a living on Guam, or they're ambitious and they want to pursue other opportunities with their skill sets. Because we are part of the United States, they're able to get on a plane and go. Right now, you got thousands. I think they've estimated in the United States, 2 million have come across the southern border, seeking a better life, coming from 130 different countries from around the world, trying to get into the United States. Does it make sense that at this point in time that we want to get out? But that's for the people to decide. These are the long-standing questions that our generation or those that will follow us will have to decide on. But for now, we must continue to advocate for the people of Guam to get further recognition and inclusion and acceptance as citizens of the United States of America. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's all the questions from the GFT.
Yep.
Yeah.
So moving over to our social media, and I apologize in advance if I butcher these usernames. The first one comes from Asdigest Kinata. There's 2 questions here. I'll read the first one. Why aren't we concerned about public safety on our roads in which our people drive on every day?
Well, that's an ongoing issue that continuously happens. That I think Public Works has come to a point where they really need to start looking at how we can keep road maintenance up to par, and not wait until we have a 8-inch pothole that's there on the road. It's about being more proactive. That we get a hotline that someone can call in and say, there's a pothole on this road here. And, we have a team that goes out there, and just covers these holes and then start looking and marking them so that we can actually go out there and not just do a Band-Aid fix, but cut them out and then resurface and repair that surface of road that needs it. And there's quite a bit of roads here on the island. I mean, when you go from Pago Bay down, from the tri intersection there in Chalampago down towards Pago Bay, that one road is just very rippled. That should actually be just cut out and then resurface so that the people don't have to worry about bouncing all over the place and then inadvertently going into the oncoming traffic. But that's what they can do is have a team that's ready to just do these quick repairs and patches, and then Public Works can go out there and start either that or they source out the contract to do repairs immediately.
Yeah, in my time, I know that we had completed with Federal Highway Administration the 2030 Federal Highway Master Plan, and a commitment for several millions of dollars over the years to deal with our primary roads and, of course, our secondary roads. We also were able to find additional funding where we were able to then work with the village mayors. And I remember telling the mayors, you have to tell us, because you represent your people in your village, what are the roads that need repair? You need to prioritize and not politicize it based on who voted for you or who didn't, but what are the roads that are in most dire need, the secondary roads that need to be paved? And we've continued that process. I recall road paving and all these issues that always go back to even the days of Governor Paul Calvo. And of course, Carl Gutierrez was well known for what he had done down in Agate, in the RR Cruz subdivision, and other roads, of course, not only bringing in roads, but power poles, the concrete power poles, and in our time again, with the primary roads and working on secondary roads. So there is always concern. I do want to take a look at what's happening down at Public Works, because in my observation, there is a firm, of course, that has been determined by Federal Highway,
right,
which is primarily run out of the district office in Honolulu. And so it seems as if Honolulu has more control over what's happening with the programs here on Guam and how they are being managed. And even the engineering department within Department of Public Works has been pretty much taken over by a third-party firm, engineering firm. And there are pluses and minuses to that, but I hear a lot of concerns about what's been ongoing and the amount of money that's been made from that.
And perhaps any conflict of interests of how that private company has gotten the contract.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that also needs to be looked into, not just locally but also federally. I mean, if there is a conflict of interest that awarded that company the contract, then we really need to get to the bottom of that and work it out. And
correct. Okay, thank you.
What was that other question?
The second question is, what happens to the federal funds received during this administration after Camacho Ada takes Adelup? How do the current administration account for those funds, and who pays for monies unaccounted for?
Well, as it relates to federal funds that apply to our roads, if that's what the question is referring to, then, certainly, again, Federal Highway Administration has a lot of say in how that goes, and it must, again, apply towards the plans that have been laid out, primary and secondary roads. But as far as federal funds, I know, Senator, you guys have dealt a lot with this in the budget process, and perhaps you can shed some light on this topic.
Well, so the administration says that we have no control over the ARP funding that's come in. That's all at the governor's discretion, and perhaps that may be true, but we can still hold people accountable for funds that are misappropriated or unaccounted for, and the way that we can look into that is having the assistance of the FBI or other agencies, federal agencies that need to be involved in looking or any misconduct that may have been going on during the pandemic time with federal funds.
I think the people of Guam need to understand the significance of what happened over the last 3.5 years. But for government of Guam under ARP and other programs, the federal funds that have poured into our island as a result of congressional action and of course, the printing of trillions of dollars out of the Federal Reserve, flooding the United States. We've received in excess, I understand, of $2 billion.
$2 billion.
Yeah. And there still remains, last I heard, is slightly under $300 million still sitting in the Bank of Guam. And so how that money was spent, and of course, Gita was very much involved in that, the Department of Public Health, and of course, the discretion and direction of the governor of Guam. It certainly warrants investigation into, or at least an analysis and an audit of where those monies went and what is unaccounted for, who have been recipients of it, and I think the procurement situation also requires a very thorough and complete audit, not only with government agencies such as the public auditor, but perhaps also including federal agencies,
right,
because these are federal monies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you look at CARES Act 1, CARES Act 2, ARP, infrastructure funding, I mean, over $2 billion just coming out to Guam. So, like they say, right, before you pass the torch over, we want to see where everything is at, because we're going to see who's going to be holding the bag on that one.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Our next question comes from Bonita_Guinevere, and they ask, crime is high. Meth on island is cheap. Our island is no longer safe. What will you do about it?
Well, certainly her statement is true. Crime is high. Meth on island is cheap. Our island is no longer safe. Our people live in fear. And yes, that's always been the question. What will you do about it? I think what's been highlighted, first of all, is the lack of police officers out there. And we'll get to that, and the need to hire and the process upon which we go about that with Department of Administration and the like. But I want to just point to one thing on a conversation I had with two individuals yesterday. One of them deals with the court system and what's happening to our youth in the drug courts and the like, and everything else that's ongoing there, what's happening in the family situation. The other is on the treatment end of it. And the sad story I heard was meth babies. So women that are addicted to meth, amphetamine, or ice, and they have, give birth to children that then have that in their system, and the lack of resources, the lack of treatment, the lack of skilled individuals that are necessary to deal with them, not only in our mental health or behavioral health sciences environment, but in our social environment is really, really sad. The fact that over the last 2.5 years we had meth. We certainly were dealing with the shutdown of our government, shutdown of our society. The children that were typically under DYA or court supervision, those programs were shut down, and with the resumption of school coming on, you've had a lot of incidences now where they're having to deal with with these individuals that did not have the treatment necessary. You have had many problems with the children, also in families where the parents have not been able to handle it, and so they end up in foster care. That also applies to meth. And so we do need to address the fact that it's cheap, which means that there's an abundance of meth and other drugs coming in on island. The concern is what's going to happen when fentanyl, if it's probably already here now, and the impact that's going to have upon our youth and our community is going to be very severe. So, the places of entry, whether it be at the port, whether it be at the airport, the drug interdiction, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the treatment of individuals, the incarceration of them? What do we do with them afterwards? What about those that are victims of it? Because every family has had to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I know that they've used this politically against me, of course. I made it very personal. But the fact is that there is opportunity that if we can gather all our resources as a community and talk about restoration of lives, not only prevention of drugs coming in and dealing with it on the streets, but how do we restore lives and make people whole where they can move on and get past their past crimes or their failures or shortfalls, build a new life and restore and go on to be living, contributing members of our community is what we need to. And so there's always been talk about doom and gloom, and we have to bring and speak life and bring hope and bring prosperity back to this island, and get rid of the fear and make this and heal this land is really what's needed. And so it's going to require everybody getting involved in this.
Yeah. And those that commit a crime and that they don't belong here, then, they get sent back to where they came from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we're interested in that.
And that's what, the Calvo administration has done. And that's something that we can also look into.
Absolutely.
This question comes from Grace Becoming. How will you turn the economy around for Guam? Is there hope?
There's always hope.
Oh, definitely. There's always hope on how to turn the economy around. Yeah. And bringing in investors, I believe, Governor, is one of those that is important to rebuilding our economy. And in order to attract investors and bring them to our island, we need to cut the bureaucratic red tape on the permitting process and the business license process and the occupancy process, permitting process. So all those things need to be streamlined, and all those things that we need to look at so that we can get them to, invest and say, we're going to help you guys with your economy. We're going to help you guys move forward. But, we need to make sure that, there's a process there in place that is not going to have us wait 3.5 years before, we're able to turn a shovel over to break ground on a project.
Right. And, our economy has always been a three-legged economy. It was based on the pillar of tourism, based on the pillar of the service industry, mm-hmm. and, of course, the military and all the federal dollars that pour into our island, both from DOD and other federal grants and the like. And so we need to go back to basics, as we've talked to people in the industry saying, you've got to help us get back and build our tourism industry, which has always been very sensitive and reactive to anything that's happening locally and globally. We've been through this before. And so working with the tourism industry to rebuild that one key component of our economy is absolutely necessary. Getting up beyond Guam, improving our product, and working to restore our island, all that we have, our environment, of course, our parks, bringing back safety and making Guam a great place, getting the retail industry back and dealing with it. And then, of course, as you mentioned, getting investors back in here, but getting back to basics. And then, of course, looking at what's happening over the next decade with the military expansion and buildup. There's so many opportunities there for our local people to get gainfully employed. In talking with somebody in the construction industry, they said if we had people that are willing to work what they call under the sun type jobs, which would include iron work, which would include carpentry and masonry. In those three areas, they've had to import labor. And so what can we do in working again with our youth? How do we find and present to them opportunities where they can see that there is a career here? And of course, when we look at our National Guard, we look at our reserves, they're a key component again to our community. So we have to work collaboratively also with the Northern Marianas and with the freely associated states of Palau, of course, of the islands in Chuuk and Pohnpei and Kusrai, the Marshall Islands, and look to our neighbors in the east, or rather west of us, which is Asia. Mm-hmm. We are in a really amazing area. So there are many global economic factors that are happening, and we're going to see a season of change that's happening globally. But being able to adjust to it and maintaining our relationship, of course, with the United States, and tying in with that all that we can to benefit our people is absolutely critical in this time.
Oh, great! That's great to hear. And we'll, with that last question, and answering that, it's going to bring us down to our B-roll.
All right.
as we close up this episode of On the Trail with Felix and Tony. Our questions on the trail come from our social media, and we encourage everyone to send in your questions. And it's at the Camacho Ara for Guam, and you can also engage us on our social media platforms on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Your questions can be sent to us in text, audio, or video, and up to this day, we still haven't gotten a video or audio question. I'm looking forward to that. We look forward to you engaging with you in the digital space and answering your questions on the show. Is there 51 days left to the general election?
Perhaps less.
Less than that, right. You can still register to vote by going online to gec.guam.gov/register, or you can visit the Guam Election Commission office at the Oka Building in Tamuning, or by calling our headquarters at 671-475-2222, and we can get a registrar to register you. Early voting begins on October 10th and ends on November 3rd. Our upcoming events this week, we got what do we got? We got a lot of things going on. I got session going on. So.
You have session, and
you got a lot of visits with private businesses that are been going really well.
Yes.
And, I think that the response from that is just tremendous. And it just goes to show that, we're getting into the grassroots, and not just with our people, but also the grassroots and the businesses that have been hurting throughout this pandemic and their concerns. So, we look forward to everyone, and hopefully we'll be able to engage in our next podcast, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Yes, I'd just like to close by saying, as we go about and meet people in the community, there is so much optimism. There's so much hope. They're looking for a new season. They're looking for the sunlight to crack through the darkness, and that's what we're going to bring that. And a lot of them are saying, we have the confidence in you, Felix and Tony, that you guys get in. You're trusted leadership. We can work with you, and so just a change of attitude, of mindset, of optimism and hope for a better future is what gets them up and motivated to make a difference. And yes, the problems are there. They will always be there as every society and community deals with it. But when there's a promise of a new season coming, that there will be change, that gets them excited, and it gives them the confidence that says, we're going to tackle this, and we're looking forward to working with you. So the constant thing I keep hearing is, we need you and Tony. You got to get in there. We need you. And we say, yes, with your help and your family and your vote, we can do this, and we'll do it together. So I always respond, we need you too. So thank you, Tony. And thank you, our listening audience. Bless you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
And we'll see you next week with Felix and
Tony.
Okay, adios.
Felix and Tony.